Okay, welcome back to our monthly webinar series. I'm Simone DeCarmo, so I'm the course coordinator at the Center for Integrative Sports Nutrition. And today we have webinar 4 of the year, and we have Rachel Bartholomew, who's one of our level 7 diploma students, and she'll be talking about food quality and why it's really important, way more than we think, for an athlete. And Rachel is an experienced nutritional therapist. She's an author. And like I said, she's currently doing our level 7 diploma in integrative sport and exercise nutrition. So all the preparation, research, and the actual delivery of the webinar counts towards her hours of study. Now, just to give you a little bit of information about our level 7 diploma before I pass on to Rachel. It is our flagship program within our course portfolio, and it is equivalent in education standard to a postgraduate diploma. And just to give you a quick overview, it consists of two 8-week in duration, roughly, base modules. So the first one being the integrative model within a sporting context, and the second one being the applied performance nutrition, but bringing in an integrative slant to it. And then students go on to doing 4 short specialty modules. So these are roughly 4 weeks in duration. And just to give you some examples of our specialty modules, we have hypertrophy for sport and exercise, ergogenic aids, gastrointestinal health for the athlete. We also have harnessing mitochondrial energy, natural sports cookery, which is very applied in nature. And then we also have our relative energy deficiency in sport, which we actually starting on Friday. And it can also be done as CPD. So if anyone's looking for some last minute CPD, feel free to get in touch if you'd like to learn more about REDS. And on natural sports cookery, as I mentioned, it's very practical. So it's all about learning how to elevate an athlete's eating routine and how to make foods more digestible and assimilable by the body. And this one is slightly longer in duration, so about 5 weeks. And all our assignments are case study based. So again, very applied in nature. And then we have after the specialty modules, the students then go on to doing a practical mentoring and case studies module. So it's learning about kind of developing those practitioner skills. And then the course is completed with designing and implementing a research project. So the diploma course is open to anyone with a relevant university degree or level 6 qualification in a related subject. And we also accept individuals who have a professional qualification plus some industry experience. So just to give you some examples, personal trainers or health coaches tend to be some of the individuals we attract. And our next cohort will start, and it's the last one of the year, will start in October. So if this appeals to you, or if you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch. We're happy to schedule a call or answer any questions by email. Now I'll pass on to Rachel. I'm really excited for this webinar because I think it's such an important topic. And coming from a conventional sports nutrition background, there is obviously a key focus on quantity. So making sure an athlete meets their caloric and macronutrient needs, which are really important. But then the quality side of things can be neglected somewhat in many contexts. So yeah, I'll pass on to Rachel now.
Thanks, Simone. And thank you everyone for coming this evening. It's 6 o'clock on a Wednesday night, and I appreciate you giving up your time to be here. And in return, I'm just going to do my best to provide you with some value on this really important subject. My aim really tonight is that with this webinar, I want you to leave kind of feeling inspired to make one small change. And if I do that, then I think I'll have had a sort of a job well done. There's going to be parts of the webinar where there'll be a little bit of interaction, and hopefully we'll have some time for some questions at the end. So why this subject? Because quality, as Simone said, is often completely neglected in favour of quantity. Quantity is really important, but I do think that paying a little bit more attention to the quality of diet needs to be given a little bit more attention to. So I'm hoping that by the end of this webinar, you'll be feeling the same too. So who am I? Gosh, that's a big question to answer. But I'm a nutritional therapist and have been since 2004. So I've been working in this field for about 20 years now. I practice in clinic, which is now on Zoom. And I also do a lot of writing. I love writing. I have a newsletter. I've written, co-authored a book called Mindful Eating, and I'm about to start a new sports nutrition blog, which I'm really excited about. I love spending time with my family, being outside. Swimming is kind of my sport of choice in the pool and open water. I've dabbled a little bit in triathlon, and I love watching athletics. I think in my work, my kind of ethos centers around being real as a practitioner, and also, being very focused on real food. I like to pay attention to the little details of a diet, because I think they can really add up to make a big difference. And I'm all about taking little steps and having consistency with those little steps. I'm currently studying the level 7 diploma that Simone just introduced you to, and I'm absolutely loving it. And I think on the next slide, I've just written a little quote about why I took on this diploma. I started in October last year, and it's the course that I've been looking for a long time, but it didn't exist. And when I heard that the diploma was starting, I jumped at the chance to be a part of it. I think sport can change lives, and I think nutrition can too. And I just think that the combination, when you put the two together, is magical. So I'm really loving the journey and excited to be on it too. So the learning aims tonight, I really want to kind of have a look at what quality food actually is. Let's define that together, and what it isn't. I want to sort of talk about why this really matters for an athlete, and then I want to finish by talking about how you can increase the quality of your diet, and hopefully you'll leave with some nice simple takeaways that you can think about putting into practice. When I started preparing for this webinar, I realized that this actually is a really huge topic, and I could be spending the whole day talking about this. So what I really want to do is kind of give you a nice overview. I want to pick out some highlights, some of the things that I've learned that have really stuck with me, and hopefully that will inspire you, spark some curiosity, and start that process of change. I think any dietary change is a journey, and really this is about just getting started and taking the first step. So what is good quality food? It's a blank slide because I'd really like some interaction here, and I'd really like to know, what do you think of when you think of good quality food? It could be a sentence, it could be a word, because I think there is no real definition, but it would be nice to hear a few thoughts on what is good quality food? What does it mean for you? So I don't know if anybody would like to put anything in the chat box, just a word, or a kind of, what does good quality food mean to you? Wholesome, that's a really lovely word. I think that encompasses a lot about quality food. Organic, yeah, I definitely agree with that one. That's a really important one for me. Seasonal, local, organic, yeah, absolutely brilliant. All these words very in line with what I would think of. As close to nature as possible, yeah, I love that one. You can't go wrong, I don't think, if you eat as close to nature as possible. Organic, seasonal, as much as possible, and small scale, and homemade. Yeah, some brilliant words there. Phytonutrient rich, yeah, I love all of this. The next slide, thank you for your input there. The next slide is a book actually I have at home. And when I was thinking about this webinar, I thought, I'm going to have a look what this book says. It's a really beautiful book, all about a real life. And in the middle of it, the author has put together her own dictionary and she's made up her own definitions to words. So I thought, I wonder what she's put for food. And she put food, fresh is best, naturally, nourishment, and energy giving. I thought, wow, that's a really good definition. I like that one. And then on the next slide, I did my own mind map, and I think it would be really nice if I add some of your words to it. So first of all, I've got real. I think real is really, really important. Nutrient dense, and by nutrients we're thinking about the carbohydrates, proteins and fats, but really they're the highlights, and all those nutrients that often get forgotten about are really, really important too. So we want vitamins and minerals, and all those plant nutrients as well. Unprocessed and minimally processed, I think, is really important. The more food gets processed, the more we lose, and you'll see that as the webinar goes on. I think quality food contains phytonutrients, that's nutrients that we get from plants. Those are not vitamins and minerals. Those are extra helpers that we get from plants, which do incredible things in your body. I think we're only just about starting to scratch the surface of the power of phytonutrients. They're also often called bioactives. And then I've put down prebiotics and probiotics. Sounds complicated, but the probiotics are the friendly bacteria in your gut, and we can actually get those in our food, and prebiotics are the food for those friendly bacteria. They really like to eat lots of kind of fibers, so we want those in our diet. Ethically produced, because I think that actually has an impact on the nutrient quality of the food. Organic, food that gives more than it takes. And then I've also put community, because I think that really good quality food is shared and it's enjoyed, and I think it's slow as well. I think that taking your time to prepare and eat your food adds to the overall quality. So that's my map, and I think what I'll do when I've finished is add some more of those lovely words to it as well. So the next slide is deliberately kind of black and white and a bit boring looking. I'm not going to go through all of this, but really kind of when I think of the sort of typical Western diet, it's really the opposite of what I've just explained. Refined and processed, lots of processed grains, simple sugars, and quite a few harmful things coming into our diet now. Not the best quality protein. We're definitely not seeing an awful lot of those lovely living foods and the food for our good bacteria. And then lots of artificial things sort of creeping in there as well. So really what I want to do next is just kind of highlight a few of the aspects of a typical Western diet that I think are quite impactful on an athlete. And I really wanted to start by talking about refining and processing, and just thinking about what happens during that processing of a food. And I thought I'd focus on grains, because athletes tend to, diets tend to be more carbohydrate heavy, looking for those foods to support energy. And what happens when a grain gets refined? So an example of that would be, the whole grain would be whole wheat, and then that would be refined into a product such as white flour. So that's the refining process, and that's the change that happens. And then that white flour might be made into pasta, it might be made into bread, cakes, and biscuits. And what happens when grains are refined is that we lose the bran and we lose the germ. And as you can see on the left there, the bran and the germ are absolutely packed full of nutrients. We've got fiber, and we've already talked about how that feeds the gut bacteria. We've got B vitamins, we've got iron, we've got magnesium, we've got healthy fats, we've got plant nutrients, we've got antioxidants, and those are stripped out of the grain. And what we're left with predominantly is the carbohydrate portion, some protein, and a little bit of some vitamins and minerals. It's leaving our food depleted of nutrients. So the next slide I wanted to highlight, because this is something I see a lot in clinic. I do actually do a test with most of my clients where I can have a look at the ratio of fats in someone's blood. And I particularly like to look at the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fats. You've probably heard quite a lot about omega-6 fats. They're not all bad, but there are some omega-6 fats which have kind of been gathering the sort of the headlines really, sort of the harmful sort of seed oils. And really, the problem with omega-6 fats is that we have too much of those in our diet and we don't have enough omega-3. So really the problem here is about the balance between these two fats. And I think that's really important for an athlete to think about, because omega-3 fats help to keep inflammation in check. And I think if you're training regularly, that's something to be really mindful of. Typical ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 in a healthy sort of ratio would be 4:1, and a typical Western diet is looking at like 20:1. And actually, I am seeing that in clinic in testing that I'm doing. So I set to work on increasing the omega-3 in someone's diet. And you'll see the kind of foods on the right that provide omega-3. And I wanted to just draw your attention to, I mean, people think of oily fish and walnuts, chia seeds and flax seeds, but I wanted to draw your attention to eggs and meat from pasture-fed chickens, and just starting thinking about that mind map of quality food, and thinking about how was that animal raised and how then does that impact the quality of the nutrients that we're getting from the food. So I think that really sort of there's a foundation there of supporting omega-3 in your diet by choosing foods from the right place. And the next slide, I wanted to kind of highlight the presence of pesticides and herbicides, and I thought I'll focus in on just one. Glyphosate gets quite a lot of attention, often called Roundup. And this is used on many crops. It's a weed controller, but what I find worrying is that it's also used pre-harvest just to help crops to dry out quickly, which means that earlier harvesting can happen. Testing finds it on many food products, also found in people's urine, in breast milk. And back in 2015, the International Agency for Research on Cancer labelled it as probably carcinogenic. And what I really want to draw your attention to about glyphosate and other pesticides and herbicides that we're getting on our food is that the part of the cell that produces energy is called the mitochondria. All I want you to kind of remember about that is that the mitochondria is really vulnerable to damage by toxins, and also the gut bacteria very vulnerable to damage as well by pesticides. So those are kind of really important parts that I kind of want to sort of you to carry with you as we move on through the webinar. The next highlight I wanted to make was about microplastics and nanoplastics. These are tiny plastic particles that can make their way into our food, usually from the food packaging or plastic water bottles. And I started to think about this and thought, you know, could athletes be at risk of a higher exposure to these small plastics? Athletes tend to have higher energy needs. They have an increased reliance on portable and packaged food and drink, drinks bottles, plastic food containers, packaging, energy gels. You know, there's so much exposure to plastic, and some of it is unavoidable. But I was just starting to think about the kind of the total potential load. Even clothing, training environments. I was thinking about artificial pitches, and the thing to think about with microplastics are about 5 millimeters in length. The nanoplastics we can't see. And what's quite worrying about those is that they are small enough to pass through into cells and body tissues, which is quite concerning. So on the next slide, I was listening to a really interesting podcast, and if you're interested in this subject, I would highly recommend it. A researcher called Heather Leslie from the Netherlands was being interviewed, and she's been recently doing some research actually looking at the plastic particles in human blood. And she was being interviewed on the podcast. It was a Triathlon Academy podcast, and really thinking about microplastics and triathletes' performance. And I pulled this quote out of the podcast because she was asked, could could microplastics be affecting our health? And really, we're at the sort of precipice of starting to understand what's going on here. And I think so much more research will be happening into this area. But she said, we know it's plausible, as in the health effects, but we can't quantify that risk at this point in science. It's something that I feel really requires the precautionary principle. And she said, then went on to say, which is when you see a signal, you should probably start to reduce your exposure if you want to be at the top of your game in terms of health. And then I started to think, well, actually, we can also think about that in terms of being at the top of your game in terms of sport as well. So the next slide was another study, and this was carried out in 2024. And this was a research team who were actually doing some imaging of the nanoplastics in bottled water. So they took single sort of 1 litres of bottled water and actually analysed how many plastics they found within the bottled water. So I thought I would just gather a little bit of feedback from you, and just if you have any idea of how many numbers you think there could potentially be in one litre of bottled water. How many tiny plastic particles do you think that they might have found on average? There's no silly answers, so if anybody wants to put any numbers in the chat box. We've got 5,000. Anybody else got any ideas? 20,000, so we're going up. It's a lot, big numbers. Did you want, Simone can reveal the answer, which is on the next slide. So 240,000, so that's close to 250,000 plastic particles in one litre bottle of water. I've actually deliberately done this slide like this because that's actually, when you see them under a microscope, they do look a bit like that, all these little coloured particles. They kind of look like they're having a party, but yeah, I don't think that's a party I want to be going to. But yeah, I was quite staggered when I read that research. So it really made me think about water in plastic bottles. And the last highlight I wanted to make was around artificial sweeteners. These are, you'll see them labelled on food as sucralose, aspartame, acesulfame K. I've written a list at the bottom so you can kind of check against. And the key highlight I wanted to kind of pull out of this was research that's going on. Again, a little bit like the plastics, we are really early in the research into the impact of artificial sweeteners, even though they've been around a long time. But this most recent research was showing that I think it was neotame, the one that was actually studied by a group at Anglia Ruskin University, and they found that they can cause damage to the intestinal wall and potentially damage to the good bacteria in our gut, which is this is not what you want your food to be doing. We want our food to be supporting the gut bacteria. So those are the kind of the highlight of the things I wanted to kind of just show about the a very processed diet. And then I really wanted to move on to thinking about, well, why does all this matter for an athlete? Is this really any more important for an athlete than any other member of the population? So I really liked this quote. I pulled it out of a 2002 paper on the athlete's diet, nutritional goals, and dietary strategies. And in the conclusion, they write, when talented, motivated, and highly trained athletes meet for competition, the margin between victory and defeat is usually small. When everything else is equal, nutrition can make the difference between winning and losing. And that's where I think those kind of marginal gains in sport can kind of happen if we start to pay attention to those smaller details. Interestingly, in this paper, most of the focus is on carbs, fats, and protein. So that was quite interesting back in 2002, that mainly that's where the focus was. So we know that carbs, fat, and protein are important. We know the quantities are important. We know the ratios. We know the timings are important, and that absolutely holds. But I really think that just focusing on those is a little bit like just focusing on the people that you see in front of you on the stage if you go to watch a show or a concert. They're kind of the stars of the show, but I really think we need to pay attention to what's going on behind the scenes too. There's so much else going on that we can't see. And yet without all of that backstage support, that show just wouldn't happen. And I kind of think of carbs, fats, and proteins a little bit like that. So what is the everything else that's going on behind the scenes? I really wanted to start talking about energy for an athlete. It's a really key consideration. It's essential. It's essential for training. It's essential for performance. And yet the body can produce energy from carbs, fats, and proteins. We see a lot of focus on quantity of carbs, especially in endurance events, and trying to get in as much as possible. But I've been working on a diagram that I've got on the wall in my office. And the more I work on it, the more complicated I realize energy production actually is. It's about so much more than carbs, fats, and proteins. And I think if we don't pay attention to everything else that's going on, we could be really missing the boat in terms of all the gains potentially we could get from our diets. So this is my this is my diagram, which is still a work in progress. And really, this is on the wall in my office. Fats, carbs, and protein, we've got them right at the top. They're the stars of the show. They're the highlights. This is what we can see. But if you start to move down the diagram, and just all I want you to pay your attention to is all the little yellow sticky notes that are stuck all over this diagram. And I've started to populate this diagram with all the different, they're called cofactors, but we can think of them as helpers to the energy process, but they're actually essential helpers. This energy production process will not happen without them. We've got magnesium, we've got B vitamins, we've got biotin, we've got iron, and you can see how often B vitamins and magnesium feature, manganese, CoQ10, and fats, carbs, and proteins you can see the arrows going down and going all whizzing around this diagram. They go through all of these processes, and in the end, we get energy. But we only get energy after this whole process has been completed, and we only get energy if all of those helpers are present all the way along the way. So as I'm kind of putting this diagram together in my office and sticking all these sticky notes on and thinking about magnesium and B vitamins and thinking, where do these nutrients come from in a processed diet? You know, they're just really, really lacking. And the other aspect I just wanted to just kind of draw your attention to about this diagram was, yeah, we need all these helpers, and everything from about a third of the way down in this diagram is happening in the mitochondria. This is the energy producing part of the cell. And I don't know if you remembered earlier when we were talking about pesticides and glyphosate, that's the part of the cell that can get quite damaged with toxins and pesticides. So all of this that's happening in the middle of this diagram is happening in the mitochondria, and we really, really need to look after the mitochondria. We need to feed the mitochondria, and we'll be rewarded with energy, and that's really key for athletes. Just before we move on from this, I just wanted to draw your attention to underneath carbs. I don't know how clearly you can see it, but there's vitamin B1 features twice just underneath carbs. And this is a really, really important nutrient for processing carbohydrates and turning carbohydrates into energy. And on the next slide, I've just done a little bit of a highlight of vitamin B1, because I think it's so important for making energy from carbohydrates. And I think that the way that we discovered vitamin B1 deficiency is actually quite interesting in reference to that. And it was actually to do with chickens who were fed white rice instead of brown rice. And they noticed that these chickens started to develop neurological problems, whereas the chickens that were fed brown rice didn't. And scientists started to think, gosh, there must be some kind of unknown substances in food that are maybe needed for the nervous system, because what's happening, why do the chickens who are fed white rice not doing very well, and the ones that are fed brown rice are fine? And that was when vitamin B1 deficiency was discovered. It's called beriberi. And when B1 was discovered, and that was back in the 1800s. But quite interesting that it was the difference in the brown rice and the white rice. And really that goes back to the refining process that we were talking about earlier, where we lose nutrients in the refining process. There's some really interesting sort of papers been written on B1, and this is a really good place to dig if you're interested in it. And someone called Derek Lonsdale has done a lot of work on vitamin B1, and he actually talks about it as high calorie malnutrition with kind of lots of refined carbohydrates, but missing that B1. So if that's something that interests you, I would dig into his work, because it's really, really interesting. But for today, I just think it's useful to kind of know that B1 sits at the gateway for getting energy from your carbohydrates, and is often lost when foods are processed. So the next sort of aspect that I think is really important, and why quality really matters for an athlete, is thinking about the gut bacteria. We've already talked about the gut bacteria a little bit, and how a quality diet can feed the gut bacteria. And we've talked about kind of that link to pesticides, and how artificial sweeteners can potentially harm the gut bacteria. And I think that when we think of kind of exercise and gut health, I think as athletes kind of understand that gut health and not great gut health can be a bit of a limiting factor, especially in endurance exercise, if gut health is kind of playing up. But actually, gut bacteria are important for way beyond just the kind of normal functionings of our guts as we are aware of it. Gut bacteria is linked to immune health, energy production, balancing inflammation, and dealing with oxidative stress. So they are so important, and all of those things are really, really important for an athlete. And I just pulled out a couple of really interesting review papers. And again, if you're interested in this area, I would really recommend reading these, because I think they really, really add a lot of extra information in this area. And in the first one is very focused on endurance exercise and gut bacteria. And really there we're kind of talking about those, those friendly bacteria that kind of, they're in your gut, they're in a community, and we really want to support that kind of ecosystem inside. And they start to sort of the introduction to the review article is about talking about endurance exercise and how we adapt. So how do we get stronger when we train and when we do exercise? And really what's happening is, there's muscle damage, and there's increased inflammation, and there's a decrease in glycogen storage, there's potential increase in something called intestinal permeability, which happens as a response to exercise and then kind of corrects itself. That's kind of a little bit of leakiness on the gut lining. And there's an increase of oxidative stress. So these are some of the things that are happening in exercise. And really what we want then to happen is that our body adapts, it deals with all of those factors and gets stronger as a result. And really what the authors are concluding here is that the gut bacteria have a key role to play in all of those things that I've just talked about. They help to control oxidative stress, so that kind of minimizing the damage and helping us to recover from the damage from exercise, really help to support balanced inflammation. And they're even involved in energy production during exercise. I mean, this is something that we really want to support. And this really is kind of one of those areas of kind of marginal gains of exercise. And the next study is looking at, again, it's another really great review article, and this one's thinking about there's almost like the gut bacteria have like a constant dialogue going on with the mitochondria. I've mentioned this a few times now. It's the part of the cell where energy is produced, where all of those processes happening, where all those helpers are involved. But we've got this constant talk going on between the gut bacteria and the mitochondria, so they support each other. And again, they've highlighted really key aspects of the gut bacteria helping with oxidative stress, inflammation, energy production. And what I find really, really fascinating, I mean, we're just at the start of this kind of understanding this area. But what I find really fascinating is that there are some molecules produced by gut bacteria that can actually help to grow new mitochondria, and that's really one of the benefits that we get from exercise. We grow mitochondria, we get more mitochondria, so we have more capacity for energy production. And the fact that the gut bacteria may have an influence on that, I just think that's absolutely fascinating. And not just from a performance point of view and a short-term gain point of view, but from a longevity point of view. I think the benefits that we can get from exercise in the long term can be massively influenced by the health of our gut bacteria. So the next and last kind of aspect I wanted to highlight was really about detoxification. And you might think that's quite a strange choice. You know, why does an athlete really need to be concerned about detoxification? Athletes generally are very clean living and not drinking, not smoking. You know, why have I highlighted detoxification? And I think that this is a real blind spot in the world of sports nutrition, and actually is a really, really important process to consider and to support. So the next slide is, more participation. You can't be falling asleep in my webinar. So where do you think toxins come from? I mean, I've obviously highlighted a few already. You can put those ones down. But where do you think toxins come from? We have a detoxification system, and our body will do a really good job of getting rid of and processing toxins. But where do you think they come from in the first place? Where are they coming from? So if anybody can wants to put anything in the chat. Packaging, yes, definitely comes from packaging. We can see we've got 240,000 of them in a plastic bottle, so we've definitely got packaging. Anywhere else where we might get toxins, anywhere in the environment, in our diets. We've got plastic, air, water, clothes, pesticides, and so absolutely brilliant. Cooking pans, air fresheners, detergents. This is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. These are all common sources of toxins, and we're surrounded by them, all the time. So the next slide, and this is why I think detoxification is a really important consideration for an athlete, because we think of toxins as all of those things that enter our body from outside. We think, we're getting toxins from food, water, all the things that we've just talked about. But actually, we are producing a lot of toxins inside our own bodies. And this is not a kind of malfunction of the body. It's a natural byproduct of all of those processes that are going on inside our bodies all of the time. And I think why I've really highlighted this for athletes is that energy production processes are a really big source of toxins being generated. And every time you're producing energy, we've got, carbs, fats, proteins going in. We've got all of those helpers. We've got all those complex processes going out. We get energy, but we also get toxins that the body then has to deal with. Hormones, when you've produced a hormone and then your body's used it, your body then has to kind of move that hormone out of the body. It has to detoxify it. Bacteria are a source of toxins, our digestive processes, and then inflammatory and immune responses. So you can see that for an athlete, there are quite a few of these processes that are going to be kind of ramped up even more. And I'm thinking even about hormones. I've put stress hormones there. Stress is a big part of being an athlete, that sort of anticipation at the start of a race, that, those stress hormones are actually really important for us to make those gains from training and from exercise, but they need to be detoxified too. And I think this is the kind of area that we don't really think about as much as those toxins that are coming from outside of the body. So athletes need to detox too. That really is my takeaway from that slide. And detox processes are also very, very energy demanding. We need a lot of energy to run those detox processes. So if I'm thinking about an athlete who's potentially got quite a high toxic load from, you know, the outside stuff, from their diet, from maybe plastics, from their environment, and then we've also got the extra kind of toxins being produced inside the body, and then that's a big energy demand as well. And it's one of the areas that I think it is really worth working on, kind of reducing that overall load. You know, how can we reduce those toxins, and how can we support them as well? How can we support the body to kind of run those detox processes in a really finely tuned way? So we need energy, you know, we need high quality protein foods, absolutely key for detoxification. If you think about detox, think protein, because it's really, really important. We need all those vitamin and mineral helpers, and there's a whole nother diagram for detox. We need antioxidants, really, really important, and we need all those plant nutrients as well. So I really wanted to kind of finish that section by just drawing your attention to this consensus statement that came from the International Olympic Committee, and it's actually on load in sport and risk of illness. And it's about, they're kind of talking about, you know, what are the kind of nutrition interventions that we can put in place to try and support athletes. And this is kind of a key area. I know that kind of from an athlete perspective, you know, injury and illness are the two biggest kind of things that can really get in the way of training and making improvements and performance. So they said, and this was 2016, and I've highlighted this because it's really nice to see this kind of information starting to come through. And they said the athlete support team can consider adopting nutritional measures to maintain robust immunity in athletes, including the following: include personalized nutrition programs to avoid deficiencies of essential micronutrients. Brilliant. Yeah, made up when I read things like that. And then considering advising athletes to ingest probiotics, such as lactobacillus probiotics, that's just one of the types of gut bacteria, on a daily basis. Consider advising athletes on the regular consumption of fruits and plants, polyphenol supplements, for example, quercetin, that's something that we get in berries and onions, or foodstuffs that may reduce risk of illness, such as green tea. So this is brilliant, and it's absolutely brilliant to start to see, you know, this kind of advice coming through. And really, I just wanted to kind of end this second section by just saying that we need to think of exercise. Yeah, absolutely brilliant, very beneficial. I think it's one of the most useful things and beneficial things you can do to support your health, but it is a stressor. And what we're doing when we exercise is that we're looking for the body to make positive adaptations to make us stronger. But we absolutely need the right ingredients and the right environment to get the short-term benefits, which will be the performance, and also the long-term benefits. And I think that's really important to think about as an athlete, because you want to be able to train for and compete for as long as possible. You want longevity in the sport. And I think it's all this foundation, this quality foundation, that's really going to help that. So how to increase the quality of your diet? How do you put all of that into practice in the context of an athlete who's training regularly and already got an awful lot on their plate? And really what I've wanted to do is just highlight my 5 top tips. I just wanted to give you something to get started with. And I really just wanted you to start thinking about the changes that potentially you could make. And I always like to think of making changes that are going to give you most back, you know, the smallest change that's going to deliver the biggest difference. And this is number 1. It's not an accident that this is number 1, because I think if navigating through sports nutrition products, I've had a look at an awful lot of sports nutrition products, and a lot do contain artificial sweeteners. And I think by pretty much avoiding those wherever possible, I think that could have a massive impact on health. The biggest obvious impact is supporting your gut bacteria, but we know your gut bacteria support your mitochondria, which has an impact on your energy levels. And then we're also going to be reducing the toxic load as well. So I think this is a small change that can have a massive impact. Where do we find them? I mean, there's rarely sports nutrition products that I pick up that don't have them in. They're in energy drinks, they're in gels, they're in protein shakes, they're in generally products which are more like powders and sort of chewable tablets or liquid supplements. And if you see no added sugar on the label, that's definitely a signpost to kind of check. So I think that by kind of navigating your way through artificial sweeteners, I think you can do a big sweep of a lot of getting rid of a lot of the things from your diet that are not going to be helpful. And then by doing that, it helps to seek out other companies that aren't using artificial sweeteners. And what you'll find, what I've found when I've looked at those products, is that actually they're putting some really beneficial ingredients in those products as well. The ones switched on to reducing artificial sweeteners are kind of really having some really lovely ingredients in as well. So that's the first one. I would and just on back on that first one, if you are an athlete kind of competing regularly, it's obviously always important to check out supplements and products on the Informed Sport website, and there are some on there that don't have artificial sweeteners as well. So that's kind of another layer of kind of safety with supplements. So the second one is choose organic where possible. And the where possible is really important, because I know that organic can be more expensive and it's not always easy to find. So I always say to my clients, I really don't want you to get kind of, it's not an all or nothing approach here. Whatever you can do will make a difference. The one caveat that I say is always buy organic eggs, because I think eggs are really nutritious, and I think if you buy organic, you're going to up the nutrition. So that's one caveat I always say. The Dirty Dozen, I don't know if you've ever heard of the list called the Dirty Dozen. It's produced by the Environmental Working Group, and they do a new one every year. It is an American organization, but I do think it's a useful starting point. And basically, they list the 12 fruits and vegetables that are usually have the most pesticides and herbicides on. Strawberries generally do feature as number one most years, and yeah, that's not a list that you want to be number one on. So start with the Dirty Dozen, have a look on there. And they also produce a list called the Clean 15, so it can help you to kind of think about where best to spend your money from an organic perspective. And I always say to my clients, you know, go organic for the things that you eat the most. If you're having, porridge for breakfast, overnight oats, making your own energy bars, buy organic oats. The foods that you eat most often, those are the ones to go for organic. Apples, that's an easy one. You can usually find organic apples and carrots and things like that. And then do a plastic audit, and just have a think about where can you remove some of that plastic from life. There might be times when plastic is necessary. I was chatting to a colleague the other day, and we were talking about running a marathon. How could you run a marathon without plastic? I'm not sure it's possible at the moment. So maybe race days, and the gels and things, it might be difficult to get rid of the plastic in those environments. But do you need a plastic water bottle in training? Maybe that's where you can switch to something that's a metal water bottle instead. So being discerning around when you do and don't have plastic in your life, I think that's a good start. My third top tip is buy real food as much as possible. Real, that's a word that came up a lot when we were talking about quality food. And I think it's really important to just start to read labels and get label savvy, like start to understand what actually is on a label. And this is a learning process. I think Ian said, quality food is as close to nature as possible. And I've written that here as well. You're not going to go too far wrong if you choose food that, is close to nature. Unfortunately, natural doesn't actually mean much on a label. So that's not really telling you much about the product. Organic does. Food has to go through strict standards to be organic. when you read labels, check out what those kind of weird chemicals actually are. They're not all bad. So just because something sounds like a weird chemical, it's not it's not necessarily bad. So some examples might be, you might see something like ascorbic acid on a label. That's actually just vitamin C. That's fine. Usually put in there as an antioxidant. But E133 brilliant blue, well, that's definitely an artificial color. Maltodextrin sounds very, chemical. It's a form of glucose, and but sucralose sounds like sugar, but that's an artificial sweetener. And another one I've come across a lot recently, which I've been digging into, is monopotassium phosphate, which is a food additive, a fertilizer, and a herbicide. And we do get that in food quite a bit. I'm not quite sure exactly, what that's doing. Whereas sodium chloride, it sounds very chemical, but it's actually just salt. So start to get, a bit savvy about the labels. And any food that's got loads of sales pitch on it, I'd be wary of that. Real food doesn't really have labels, and it doesn't need to sell itself. My next one is choose real color and lots of variety. Athletes can tend to veer towards kind of eating the same foods, and I understand that because it's, time is restricted. You get to know what your body likes, and it's easy to reach for the same things. You can eat, what suits you, what tolerates you. But it doesn't need to be an all or nothing approach. This is about making small changes, and just seeing how you are with that. And thinking about the difference in different scenarios as well. Race day, you might want to approach race day the same all the time, and that's probably a better strategy. But what about recovery day? That's perhaps a day when you can start to experiment a little bit more with different foods. And even if you have the same food, say, for example, you have porridge every day for breakfast, you can experiment with different toppings. I like to challenge my clients to do a super salad challenge. And because I think a salad is a really easy way to get loads of variety. And you'll see in the top right, that was a salad I made. I think there's probably about 11 or 12 different ingredients just in the base salad. And then by the time you've added some protein and some dressing, I mean, you could add some cooked potatoes in there. You could put some quinoa, you could put some nuts and seeds. There could be some cold pasta in there. You could do what you want with that, but suddenly you've got a lot of variety. And on the left, you can have a go at making your own energy bars, and I've given you a recipe for these at the end. And top left is all the ingredients that go into those energy bars that I make. So really showing the variety, and there's whole grains, whole foods. I think wheat, can feature heavily in an athlete's diet, and I just like to sort of encourage people to think beyond wheat as a whole grain. Kefir is a great alternative to yogurt that contains those friendly bacteria, and I encourage everyone to eat broccoli sprouts because they are brilliant for detoxification. And my very last slide, well, not my last slide, but my last tip, really is to encourage you to think about progress and not perfection with this. This really is a journey. And this is about learning on the job and just having a go and seeing what suits you and just seeing if you can make one small change. I think the context is really, really important. Consider your context as an athlete, and you are totally unique. And what will work for you might not work for somebody else. And it's really important to think about that and think about the different scenarios, and not be too kind of, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. The 80-20 rule works really well. I think there is a balance to be had between quantity and quality as an athlete. And I think we do need to be concerned with the quantity and the different balance of the carbs, fats, and proteins. But I think there is a balance where we can get some more quality in, and just step by step. And I really like this little quote, which is, start where you are with what you have and do all you can, and embrace the journey. And I wanted to leave you with, this is a brilliant book. It's actually borrowed from my sister, but it's absolutely brilliant. It's written by a Olympic marathon runner, and a whole food chef. And actually, there's a lovely quote from Alison Felix, the Olympic gold medal sprinter on the back. And she says, there are so many misleading diet trends pushed at young athletes. Finally, here's a book after my own heart, celebrating, indulging in real food. And I absolutely love this. And it reminds me that it absolutely is possible to have a wholesome diet as an athlete, and it can be enjoyable too. But I would highly recommend that book. It's full of brilliant recipes and tips, and it's a great bit of information at the start about whole foods. So I would really recommend that. So my next question is, what will you change? What's one small thing that you could do from tomorrow that will be a change to your diet to improve the quality? Be nice to see, yeah, some answers in the chat of any ideas of what you might change. Simone's put, make sure I have a salad daily. That tends to slip away at times. Yeah, do you know what? A daily salad, I think, is just such an addition to your diet. And once you get started, that's really, really a great change. Stop drinking sparkling water from plastic bottles. Yeah, I mean, that's a massive change as well. I'm buying organic strawberries. Yeah, it's such an important one, that the organic strawberries, because they look so juicy, don't they, in the packets? And then you think, oh gosh, what's on them? So organic strawberries is a really great change. Make sure to have leafy vegetables. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. I eat nuts daily, so do I need to make sure these are organic? Yeah, I mean, again, I would say whatever you can do, whatever you can do as a step towards that is great. Obviously, organic nuts are going to be better because they've not got the pesticides on, but maybe that's not always possible. So I would just say do what you can in terms of organic nuts. And if you eat, a lot of nuts, then that's probably quite a good priority food for you to choose organic. I love that quote. What you do every day matters more than what you do every once in a while. And I think that's really important for your diet as well. Choose the changes. If you have an apple every day, well, make that one organic. So yeah, I could write those little changes in my people's speech boxes. So yeah, keep in touch and send me a line, say hello, or send me a line to say you're interested in my new sports nutrition blog that's going to be coming out soon. There's so much to cover and so much to talk about. And I also have a Little Steps newsletter as well. And then at the end of the slides, I've added loads of resources of everything I've mentioned. If you want to dig into any of this, it's all there. I actually wrote a little step on eggs, which will kind of add weight to why I always recommend organic eggs. And there's a lovely business nearby here that has a website. It's called the Natural Living Shop, and they do so many lovely plastic-free food and drink containers and lots of ideas for plastic-free living. That's really worth a look. So I'd give them a shout out because they're doing great work there. And then there's the Informed Sport website as well. And then all my references are at the end as well. So I don't know if we've got time. Yeah, there's the recipe. I don't know if we've got time for any questions, Simone, or.
Yeah, I think we have a couple of questions that we can maybe answer before we go. One from Mansi. Are no added sugar food always free from artificial sweeteners, or they still contain them?
No added sugar is just a label that just kind of alerts me when I'm shopping. Sometimes no added sugar might have a sweetener in that is more natural. So, but it's a kind of a signpost to tell me to definitely check the label. And I find, unfortunately, that more often than not, no added sugar foods usually do have artificial sweeteners in. That's kind of something I've kind of learned but it's not always. So it's just kind of like, if I see that, I think, check the label. That's
Yeah,
really
it could be
cool.
like I don't know, like a fruit smoothie. It has a natural sugar from the fruit.
Yes,
There's no added sugar to it. It
yes,
still has the sugar.
yes, yeah, yeah. So it's yeah, it's just a signpost to check the label,
I think
definitely.
that's a
I
good
think I
tip.
find that with yogurts, no added sugar If it's like a fruit yogurt with no added sugar, they
Yeah,
do
then they
often
add
have
stuff.
they often have sweeteners in, don't they?
And then last question, are refined grains easier to digest? If so, is this beneficial to an athlete even if it's not healthy?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really important question as well, because we do have to think about that balance for an athlete. And this is where the kind of quantity versus, not versus, quantity and quality balance comes into play. And that's when I think, it's about finding what suits you as an athlete. And sometimes it's about getting more fuel in, and that will come in the form of a refined grain. I think the key kind of point to take away is that it is for that athlete to think, well, does it need to be a refined grain all the time, or are there days actually when I could make a meal with more of a whole grain? So maybe I've got a day off training, and maybe that's the day. But actually, if I'm coming up to a big event and I need to get more carbohydrates in, or on race day, then generally the refined grains are going to be easier in that scenario. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Simone.
No, I agree. And again, everyone's different. You get some athletes that can tolerate the whole grain before a
Yeah,
race.
yeah,
But yeah, you do get those that need the more refined version, just so it doesn't upset their stomach or their gut. Um, but yeah,
yeah.
again, yeah, everyone's different, and I agree with you. It's finding that balance for each person.
Yeah. And I always think of like the gut bacteria. It's not just the fiber on grains that's going to feed them. All those vegetable fibers are going to feed them as well. So you don't necessarily need loads of whole grains. It's about finding that balance in your diet,
Yeah.
to support all those aspects. Um,
And I have one last question before we go. How you talk a lot about microplastics, nanoplastics. I find that really interesting. Do you have any like practical tips for athletes specifically, what they can do to kind of minimize their exposure? So you mentioned maybe instead of plastic bottles, have a metal or glass bottle as for their training. Is there any other practical tips that you could provide?
I think that choosing the change that's kind of going to give you most bang for your buck. So what is the thing that you're doing kind of every day? So the water bottle or the drinks bottle is usually the thing that kind of people change first. I think a portable food container is a brilliant investment as well. And so many places are doing those now, like even IKEA, you can get brilliant glass containers. And you can, they can be a portable container, or you can get metal ones. I think it's the company Black and Bloom that do really lovely portable metal containers as well. So I think that when you're out and about and taking food and drinks with you, and one other thing which I think is really, really important, and it's something that the researcher mentioned in the podcast when she was talking about microplastics. And she said, plastics and sunshine don't go well together. And that really was a nod to the fact that if you've got something in a plastic container and it gets heated, the movement of plastics into that food or drink are just accelerated. So I say to people, if you're out for the day and you've got a plastic water bottle and it's sat on the track in the sunshine, like that's really something to be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Even changing the water regularly is going to help. And also, don't heat up food in plastic containers. It's quite a microwave meals tend to come in plastic containers, don't they? And people are heating them, and that's where the plastics are going in. So I think they would be my top tips, and just remembering that link between plastic and heat is an important one.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel. That was enlightening, as Tracy says. Very interesting. So yeah, I'll send everyone a recording and a copy of the slides tomorrow. And yeah, if you want to find out more about CISN, you've got a website here at the top. We have our podcast as well, Health Feeds Performance Podcast, and then all our social links. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a good evening.
Thank you so much, everyone.